The morning sun cast long shadows across the Martinez ranch as Isabella stood on the wraparound porch, her silk dress rustling in the desert breeze. At 24, she possessed the kind of beauty that made visiting merchants stumble over their words: dark hair that caught the light like polished obsidian, eyes the color of rich chocolate, and skin that had never known a day of hard labor. Yet for all her beauty and her father's wealth, Isabella felt as trapped as a songbird in a gilded cage. "Mija, you must come inside," called her duenna, Señora Carmen, from the doorway. "The sun will darken your complexion." Isabella sighed but didn't move. Beyond the adobe walls of their compound, she could see the vast expanse of Arizona territory stretching toward distant purple mountains. Somewhere out there was a world she'd never truly experienced, a world of adventure, passion, and real connection with another human soul. Her father, Don Ricardo Martinez, had built an empire from nothing, transforming barren land into a thriving cattle operation. But his success had come at the cost of Isabella's freedom. She was educated by private tutors, chaperoned at all times, and had never been allowed to travel beyond the nearest settlement of Esperanza Springs. At an age when most women were married with children, Isabella remained painfully innocent about matters of the heart. The thunder of approaching hoofbeats broke her reverie. A lone rider appeared through the heat shimmer, sitting tall in his saddle with an easy confidence that made Isabella's breath catch. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sandy hair beneath his worn hat, and a gun belt that spoke of a man comfortable with violence. "That must be Jake Morrison," Señora Carmen whispered, appearing beside Isabella despite her earlier protests about the sun. "Your father hired him as the new foreman. They say he's killed 7 men in fair fights." Isabella's heart raced. Jake Morrison. She'd heard the name whispered in Esperanza Springs with a mixture of fear and admiration. He was everything her sheltered world wasn't: dangerous, experienced, and utterly masculine. Jake dismounted near the main house with fluid grace, his spurs jingling against the packed earth. When he looked up and saw Isabella on the porch, his weathered face broke into a practiced smile. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of Texas, "I'm Jake Morrison. Your father's expecting me." "Welcome to Rancho Martinez, Señor Morrison," Isabella managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am Isabella Martinez." Jake's pale blue eyes appraised her with an intensity that made her cheeks burn. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Martinez. Your reputation for beauty wasn't exaggerated." Before Isabella could respond, her father emerged from the house, his boots heavy on the wooden planks. Don Ricardo was a bear of a man, his black beard now streaked with silver, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Morrison, glad you made it safely. The Apache have been more active lately. Lost 2 steers last week to raiders." Jake's expression hardened. "Won't be a problem once I'm settled in, Don Ricardo. I know how to handle their kind." Something in his tone made Isabella uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite identify why. Her father seemed pleased with the answer, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "Excellent. Isabella, go inside now. Morrison and I have business to discuss." As Isabella reluctantly obeyed, she couldn't help but steal one last glance at Jake Morrison. He was speaking with animated gestures about his plans for improving security, his confidence absolute and magnetic. This was the kind of man who could show her what she'd been missing, if only she knew how to capture his attention. Later that evening, as Isabella sat by her bedroom window brushing her hair, she reflected on her predicament. How could she hope to win the affections of a man like Jake Morrison when she'd never even been kissed? Her sheltered upbringing, which her father considered a blessing, now felt like a curse. The sound of night birds calling across the desert reminded her of another encounter from that afternoon, one that had been overshadowed by Jake's dramatic arrival. While walking in the garden before sunset, she'd noticed a figure moving silently along the ridge that bordered their property. When she looked more carefully, she'd seen him, tall, lean, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to this harsh land. Aiyana, the Apache tracker who occasionally guided supply wagons through the dangerous mountain passes. Unlike other Apache, he'd learned to speak fluent Spanish and English during his youth, making him invaluable as a translator and guide for those willing to treat with the Apache bands. Her father, pragmatic above all else, had employed Aiyana's services several times when negotiating safe passage through disputed territories. There was something about the Apache warrior that intrigued Isabella, a quiet dignity that contrasted sharply with Jake Morrison's bold confidence. Where Jake commanded attention, Aiyana seemed to move through the world like smoke, present but not demanding recognition. As the desert night settled around Rancho Martinez, Isabella made a decision that would change the course of her life. Somehow, she had to learn what it meant to be a woman, to love and be loved, and if that meant venturing beyond the safe boundaries her father had built around her, then so be it. The first step would be winning Jake Morrison's heart, but first, she had to learn how to be worthy of it. Little did Isabella know that her education in matters of the heart would come from the most unexpected teacher of all. 3 days had passed since Jake Morrison's arrival, and Isabella had barely exchanged more than polite greetings with the man who occupied her every waking thought. Each morning she watched from her window as he worked with the vaqueros, his commanding presence evident even from a distance. When he removed his shirt in the midday heat, revealing a torso marked by old scars, Isabella's cheeks burned with emotions she couldn't name. But despite her father's dinner invitations, Jake remained politely distant. He spoke to her with the same courteous reserve he might show any rancher's daughter, never lingering in conversation, never allowing his pale eyes to hold hers for more than a moment. It was driving Isabella to distraction. "He thinks I'm just a child," she confided to Senora Carmen as they sat in the courtyard, the older woman's needlework steady in her weathered hands. "Perhaps that is for the best, mija," Carmen replied without looking up. "Men like Morrison are dangerous. Your father would never approve of such an attachment." "But I'm 24. In Mexico City, women my age have been married for years, have children. How am I supposed to understand anything about life if I'm kept locked away like a precious relic?" Carmen's needle paused. "What exactly are you asking, Isabella?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implications. Isabella stood and paced to the fountain at the courtyard center, where water trickled over carved stone angels. "I don't know how to be with a man, how to make him see me as a woman worthy of his attention." "Isabella Maria Martinez." Carmen dropped her needlework entirely. "Such talk is unseemly for a proper lady." "Proper ladies don't win the hearts of men like Jake Morrison," Isabella shot back, her frustration finally boiling over. "I've read about passion in books, but I've never felt it. I've dreamed of romance, but I wouldn't know how to begin if the opportunity presented itself. I don't even know how to kiss, Carmen." "How pathetic is that?" The admission hung between them like a confession. Carmen's expression softened with understanding and worry. "Child, these are not things you learn from lessons. They come naturally when you find the right man." "But what if the right man doesn't notice me because I'm so obviously inexperienced?" Their conversation was interrupted by the soft jingle of spurs on stone. Both women turned to see Aiyana approaching through the garden archway, moving with his characteristic silent grace. He wore buckskin leggings and a cotton shirt, his long black hair bound back with a leather cord. A rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm. "Perdón, Señorita Martinez," he said in perfect Spanish, his voice like river stones. "Your father asked me to inform you that a supply wagon will depart for Tucson tomorrow. He wishes to know if you need anything from the city." Isabella studied the Apache warrior's face. His features were strong and angular, weathered by sun and wind, but not hardened by cruelty like so many men in this territory. His dark eyes held intelligence and something else, a depth that spoke of someone who understood the complexities of living between two worlds. "Gracias, Aiyana," she replied, then made a decision that surprised even herself. "Actually, I wonder if I might speak with you privately, about a personal matter." Carmen sucked in a sharp breath. "Isabella, that would not be appropriate." But Aiyana's expression remained calm and respectful. "Of course, señorita, though perhaps your duenna should remain present, for propriety." "No," Isabella said firmly, feeling a surge of the same courage that had driven her ancestors to conquer new worlds. "This is something I must discuss alone. Carmen, please give us a few minutes." The older woman looked scandalized, but something in Isabella's tone brooked no argument. She gathered her needlework and retreated into the house, muttering prayers under her breath. When they were alone, Isabella found her courage faltering. How did one ask such a favor of someone like Aiyana? He waited patiently, his stance relaxed but alert, like a wild creature ready to flee or fight, depending on the circumstances. "I need to ask you something that may sound very strange," Isabella began, wrapping her arms around herself, "and I need your word that you will not speak of it to anyone, especially my father." Aiyana nodded once. "You have my word." The simple certainty in his voice gave Isabella the strength to continue. "You've seen the world beyond these walls. You understand things that I've been protected from understanding. I need to learn about being close to someone, about how to show affection. If Aiyana was shocked by her request, he didn't show it. His expression remained carefully neutral. You speak of the gunslinger. It wasn't a question. Isabella felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to nod. Jake Morrison is everything I've dreamed of, strong, experienced, confident, but when I'm near him, I feel like a child playing at being a woman. I don't know how to talk to him, how to make him see me as someone worth loving. And you believe I can teach you these things? You've lived in both worlds, Isabella said desperately. You understand Apache ways and white ways. You've known women from different cultures. I've heard the vaqueros talk. They say Apache courtship is different from Mexican customs, that your people are more direct about matters of the heart. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. Finally, he spoke. What exactly are you asking of me, Isabella? The use of her first name, spoken in his deep voice without the formal señorita, sent an unexpected shiver through her. She took a deep breath and spoke the words that would change everything. I don't know how to kiss, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been held by a man, never felt what the poets write about. If I'm ever going to win Jake's heart, I need to learn these things. And she looked up into his eyes, her own wide with vulnerability and determination. I need you to be my teacher. The silence that followed was broken only by the gentle splash of water in the fountain and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the evening air. Aiyana's expression was unreadable, but Isabella thought she saw something flicker in his dark eyes, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. This is not a small thing you ask, he said finally. I know, but I have no one else to turn to. Will you help me? Aiyana looked toward the house, then back at her face. When he smiled, a slow, gentle curve of his lips that transformed his stern features, Isabella felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with Jake Morrison. Then I'll be your teacher, he said simply. But Isabella, you may find that the lessons lead you somewhere you never expected to go. The next evening, Isabella waited in the garden long after the household had settled into sleep. The moon hung full and silver above the desert, casting everything in ethereal light and deep shadows. She had spent the entire day in nervous anticipation, second-guessing her boldness and wondering if Aiyana would actually come. When she heard the soft whisper of moccasins on stone, her heart began to race. Aiyana emerged from the shadows like a spirit, moving so silently that she wondered how many times he had passed unseen through their territory. Tonight he wore traditional Apache clothing, buckskin and turquoise, his hair loose around his shoulders, making him look more like a creature of legend than the practical guide she knew. You came, she whispered, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I gave my word. He studied her face in the moonlight. But I must ask again, are you certain this is what you want? Once we begin, there will be no pretending these lessons never happened. Isabella nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. I'm certain. I need to understand what I've been missing all my life. Aiyana moved closer, close enough that she could smell the desert sage and leather that seemed to cling to his skin. Then we begin with understanding. True connection between a man and woman is not about technique, Isabella. It comes from here. He placed his hand gently over her heart, the warmth of his palm seeping through the thin fabric of her nightgown. And here, his other hand touched her temple with infinite gentleness. I don't understand, she whispered, acutely aware of how his touch made her pulse quicken. Your gunslinger sees only your beauty, your father's wealth, perhaps the challenge of winning something precious. But he does not see you, Isabella, the woman who dreams of freedom, who has the courage to ask an Apache warrior to teach her about passion. His words struck her like a physical blow. You're wrong. Jake Morrison is everything I've dreamed of. Tell me about these dreams, Aiyana interrupted softly. What do you imagine when you think of love? Isabella found herself speaking before she could censor her thoughts. I dream of someone who sees the world through my eyes, who understands that I want more than pretty dresses and safe walls. Someone who would take me to see the sunrise from the mountain peaks, who would teach me to read the stars and understand the language of the wind. Someone who would love me for my spirit, not just my face. And you believe Morrison is this man? The question hung between them, and Isabella realized she had never actually considered whether Jake Morrison possessed any of the qualities she had just described. All she knew of him was his reputation and his undeniable physical appeal. I don't know, she admitted. Then perhaps the first lesson is this: know yourself before you try to give yourself to another. Aiyana's hands fell away from her, but he remained close. What draws you to Morrison? Be honest. Isabella struggled with the question. He's handsome, strong. The other women in Esperanza Springs whisper about him like he's some kind of hero from a dime novel. When he looks at me, I feel like I matter. Because of who you are, or because of what you represent. The distinction hit her like cold water. I don't know the difference, she said quietly. Then that is what we must explore. Aiyana reached up and gently touched her face, his calloused fingers tracing the line of her cheek. Close your eyes, Isabella. She obeyed, her breath catching as his touch sent unexpected warmth through her entire body. What do you feel? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Your hand is warm, gentle. It makes me feel, she searched for words, safe, but also awakened, like I've been sleeping and am just beginning to dream. Now imagine Morrison touching you this way. What do you feel? Isabella tried to picture Jake's pale eyes, his confident smile, but when she imagined his touch, something felt wrong. It felt like being admired rather than known, appreciated rather than understood. I feel like he's taking something from me instead of sharing something with me, she said with sudden clarity. Open your eyes. When Isabella looked at Aiyana again, she was startled by the intensity of his gaze. In the moonlight, his face seemed to hold all the mystery and beauty of the desert itself, harsh and gentle, dangerous and protective, wild and wise. You are beginning to understand, he said. Physical intimacy without emotional connection is empty, Isabella. It may bring pleasure, but it will not bring you the fulfillment you seek. Then teach me about both, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. Teach me what it means to truly connect with another person. Aiyana was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could see him wrestling with some internal conflict. Such lessons are dangerous, little flower. Once you understand the difference between shallow attraction and deep connection, you cannot unknow it. I don't want to unknow it. I want to be awake, Aiyana. I've spent 24 years asleep in my father's house. Please. The plea in her voice seemed to break down his final resistance. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Then we begin with the simplest lesson, he said, his hands coming up to frame her face. A kiss shared between two people who truly see each other. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. I told you I don't know how. You know more than you think, Aiyana murmured, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones. Listen to what your heart tells you, not what you think you should do. When his lips touched hers, it was nothing like Isabella had imagined. There was no desperate passion, no overwhelming force. Instead, it was like coming home to a place she had never been but always longed for. His kiss was patient and warm, a conversation without words, a sharing rather than a taking. When they finally parted, Isabella found herself breathless, not from excitement, but from a deep sense of recognition, as if she had just discovered a part of herself she never knew existed. That, Aiyana said softly, his forehead resting against hers, is what it feels like to be truly seen by another person. Isabella looked up into his dark eyes and realized with startling clarity that everything she thought she wanted from Jake Morrison she had just found in the arms of the Apache warrior who had agreed to be her teacher. Aiyana, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and the first stirrings of understanding. See, little flower? I think I'm beginning to learn something I wasn't expecting to learn. His smile in the moonlight was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That, Isabella, is the most important lesson of all. The days following Isabella's first lesson passed in a haze of newfound awareness. Every interaction with Jake Morrison now felt hollow, like watching a performance rather than engaging with a real person. When he complimented her dress at dinner, she heard only practiced charm. When he regaled her father with tales of his exploits, she noticed how his eyes never truly focused on her, but rather seemed to calculate her reaction. Meanwhile, thoughts of Aiyana consumed her. She found herself watching the horizon for signs of his return, remembering the gentle strength in his hands, the way he had looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. The memory of their kiss haunted her dreams and made her restless during the long, hot afternoons. It was during one such afternoon that Jake Morrison finally made his move. Isabella was reading in the courtyard when his shadow fell across her book. She looked up to find him standing there with that practiced smile, his hat in his hands. Miss Martinez, I was wondering if I might have a word with you, privately. Isabella's heart should have raced with excitement. This was what she had dreamed of, Jake Morrison seeking her out, wanting to speak with her alone. Instead, she felt only a hollow anticipation, like watching storm clouds gather without any real expectation of rain. "Of course, Senor Morrison. Please sit." He settled onto the stone bench beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, store-bought and cloying compared to Aiyana's natural scent of sage and desert wind. When he reached for her hand, she let him take it, studying his touch with the new understanding Aiyana had given her. Jake's hand was smooth, soft, despite his reputation as a gunfighter. His touch felt possessive rather than connecting, as if he were claiming something rather than sharing a moment. "Isabella," he said, and she noticed how he used her first name without permission, assuming an intimacy he hadn't earned. "I've been watching you these past weeks, and I find myself quite taken with your beauty and grace." The words felt rehearsed, like lines from one of her romance novels. Isabella found herself comparing them to Aiyana's honest observation about her courage, his recognition of her spirit rather than just her appearance. "That's very kind of you to say," she replied, wondering why his declaration felt so empty. "I'm not a man given to pretty speeches," Jake continued, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in what should have been a romantic gesture. "But I believe we could have a fine future together. Your father's mentioned that he's looking for the right man to help manage his holdings, someone with the skills to protect what he's built." Isabella's stomach dropped. "You've spoken to my father about me, just in passing. He's a practical man, and he knows you need a husband who can handle the dangers of this territory. Someone with my reputation commands respect, Isabella. With me as your husband, no one would dare threaten you or your family's interests." The mercenary nature of his proposal struck Isabella like a physical blow. This wasn't love or even genuine affection. It was a business transaction dressed up in romantic language. Jake Morrison saw her as a prize to be won, a means to secure his position and her father's wealth. "I see," she said quietly, pulling her hand free from his grasp. "And what makes you think I'm looking for protection rather than partnership?" Jake's smile faltered slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to question his logic. "Well, naturally a woman wants security. What I want," Isabella interrupted, rising from the bench, "is someone who sees me as more than a beautiful ornament or a pathway to prosperity. What I want is someone who understands that I have thoughts and dreams beyond being some man's decorative wife." Jake stood as well, his expression hardening. "You've been reading too many of those romantic novels, Isabella. Real life isn't like those fairy tales. A practical arrangement between us would benefit everyone." "Practical," Isabella repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. "Is that what you think love should be? Practical? Love is a luxury," Jake said with dismissive certainty. "What matters is compatibility, security, mutual benefit. I can give you a comfortable life and protection. In return, you bring beauty, breeding, and your father's connections. It's a fair trade." Isabella stared at him, finally seeing Jake Morrison clearly for the first time. He wasn't the romantic hero she had imagined. He was just another man who saw women as commodities to be acquired. The revelation was both devastating and liberating. "I think you should go," she said quietly. Jake's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Isabella. Men like me don't wait around forever, and opportunities like this don't come along often in this godforsaken territory." "Then I suggest you look elsewhere for your practical arrangement," Isabella replied, surprised by her own strength. "I want more than a transaction disguised as marriage." Jake's mask of charm slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "You'll regret this, Isabella. Out here, pretty girls with romantic notions end up as old maids or worse. When you come to your senses, I might not be available." With that threat disguised as prophecy, he stalked away, leaving Isabella alone in the courtyard with her shattered illusions and newfound clarity. That evening, she waited in the garden again, hoping Aiyana would come. When he appeared like a shadow among the olive trees, Isabella felt her heart lift in a way it never had for Jake Morrison. "You look troubled, little flower," Aiyana said, approaching slowly. "What weighs on your spirit?" Isabella told him everything. Jake's proposal, her realization about his true nature, her own shame at having been so blind to what should have been obvious. "I feel like such a fool," she concluded. "I was so dazzled by his reputation that I never bothered to look beneath the surface." Aiyana listened without judgment, his dark eyes reflecting understanding and compassion. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You are not a fool, Isabella. You are a woman learning to trust her own wisdom. Many people live entire lives without recognizing the difference between what glitters and what truly has value. But how did you know? When you asked me those questions about what I really wanted, how did you see what I couldn't see? Aiyana moved closer, his hand coming up to touch her face with the same gentle reverence she remembered from their first kiss. Because I see you, Isabella. Not the rancher's daughter or the beautiful prize, but you, the woman who dreams of mountain sunrises and starlight, who has the courage to ask for what she needs, even when it frightens her. Aiyana, she whispered, her heart finally acknowledging what her mind had been slowly accepting. I think I've been learning the wrong lesson. What lesson is that? I thought you were teaching me how to win Jake Morrison's heart, but what you've really taught me is how to recognize the difference between empty attraction and real connection. She looked up into his eyes, seeing her own feelings reflected there. What you've taught me is that I don't want Jake Morrison at all. I want you. The confession hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. In Aiyana's eyes, Isabella saw surprise, joy, and something that looked like fear. Isabella, he said carefully, I am Apache. You are the daughter of a wealthy landowner. Our worlds have already collided, she interrupted, stepping closer until she could feel the warmth of his body. They collided the moment I asked you to be my teacher, and you said yes. They collided the moment you kissed me and showed me what it feels like to be truly seen. Your father would never accept such a union. Your people will have to learn to accept it, just as I'm learning that love isn't about practical arrangements or social expectations. Isabella reached up and touched his face, marveling at how right it felt. It's about finding the person who sees your soul and choosing to trust them with your heart. Aiyana caught her hand and pressed it against his cheek, his eyes closing, as if her touch brought him pain and pleasure in equal measure. You don't know what you're asking, little flower. The path you speak of would not be easy. I don't want easy, Isabella replied with quiet certainty. I want real. I want you. When Aiyana opened his eyes, Isabella saw her own determination reflected there, along with a love so deep it took her breath away. Then we will face whatever comes together, he said simply, and bent to kiss her with a passion that spoke of commitment rather than mere desire. In that moment, under the desert stars, Isabella finally understood the difference between infatuation and love, between wanting to be desired and needing to be known. Her lessons in the heart were complete, though the real adventure was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Isabella's confession in the moonlit garden, and the secret of her growing love for Aiyana had become both a source of joy and mounting tension. They met whenever possible, brief encounters when he came to guide supply wagons, stolen moments in the early morning when she walked the garden before the household awakened. Each meeting deepened their connection, but also made the impossibility of their situation more apparent. Isabella had grown adept at deflecting her father's questions about Jake Morrison, claiming she needed more time to consider his proposal. But she could see Don Ricardo's patience wearing thin, especially as rumors began circulating about Jake's increasingly frequent visits to the cantina in Esperanza Springs and his attention to other women. The crisis came on a scorching afternoon in late summer. Isabella was reading in the library when she heard raised voices from her father's study. Through the partially open door, she could see Jake Morrison gesticulating angrily while her father listened with a thunderous expression. Complete disrespect for everything I've offered, Jake was saying, his voice slurred with drink. Your daughter thinks she's too good for me, Don Ricardo. She needs to be reminded of her place. Isabella is not livestock to be broken to harness, Morrison, her father replied coldly. If she doesn't wish to accept your proposal, that is her choice. Is it? Because I've heard interesting rumors about why she might be rejecting good Christian men. Some say they've seen her talking to that Apache scout. Alone, at night. Isabella's blood turned to ice. The book slipped from her nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a sound that seemed to echo like thunder. That is a serious accusation, Don Ricardo said, his voice deadly quiet. Are you suggesting my daughter has been inappropriate? I'm saying maybe you should ask yourself why a beautiful girl would turn down a respectable marriage proposal. Maybe she's already been claimed by someone else, someone who doesn't have the courtesy to ask permission. Isabella heard her father's chair scrape against the floor. Get out of my house, Morrison, now. You'll regret this, old man. Both of you will regret this. Heavy footsteps approached the library door, and Isabella barely had time to compose herself before Jake Morrison appeared in the doorway. His pale eyes were ugly with drink and spite. Enjoying your romantic novels, Isabella? He asked with a cruel smile. Or do you prefer real-life savages to fictional heroes? Before Isabella could respond, he was gone, leaving behind only the stench of whiskey and malice. A few moments later, her father appeared, his face grave with concern. "Isabella, we need to talk." They sat in his study, the afternoon heat making the air thick and oppressive. Don Ricardo studied his daughter's face with the same intensity he brought to evaluating cattle or judging the weather. "Is there truth to what Morrison implied?" he asked finally. Isabella met her father's eyes steadily. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing it would come eventually. "If you're asking whether I've been meeting with Aiyana, then yes. If you're asking whether he has treated me with anything but respect and honor, then no, Isabella." Her father's voice carried a world of disappointment and fear. "Do you understand what you're risking? Your reputation, your future, your safety? I understand that I'm 24 years old and capable of making my own choices," Isabella replied quietly. "I also understand that you raised me to value honor, intelligence, and character above all else. Aiyana possesses all of these qualities. He is Apache, mija. The authorities, the neighbors, even the church would see such a union as impossible. I've worked my entire life to build something lasting here, and you're afraid that my choices might threaten what you've built," Isabella finished. "I understand your concerns, Papa, but I won't sacrifice my happiness for the comfort of people who judge others by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character." Don Ricardo was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the vast expanse of his holdings. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation and something that might have been pride. "You are more like your mother than I realized." She had the same stubborn courage, the same willingness to follow her heart regardless of consequences. He turned back to Isabella. "If this man is truly what you want, then I will not stand in your way. But Isabella, you must understand, the path you're choosing will not be easy." The relief that flooded through Isabella was so intense, she felt lightheaded. "You'll accept him? Accept us? I'll accept your choice, because you're my daughter, and I love you more than I love my own comfort." Don Ricardo's smile was sad but genuine. "But we must be practical about this. Morrison will not keep quiet about what he suspects, and there will be those who see your marriage as a threat to the established order. Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest you and Aiyana leave Arizona territory. I have business connections in California, around San Francisco. The territories west of the Sierra Nevada are more tolerant of unusual arrangements. I can provide you with enough money to start fresh, establish yourselves somewhere your love won't be seen as a scandal." Isabella's throat tightened with emotion. The sacrifice her father was offering, losing his only child to protect her happiness, spoke to a love deeper than she had ever imagined. "Papa, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering, because that's what fathers do for their daughters." That evening, Isabella waited in the garden with her heart pounding. When Aiyana appeared, she could see immediately that he had news of his own. His usually calm expression was troubled, his movements tense with suppressed energy. "Morrison has been spreading rumors in Esperanza Springs," he said without preamble. "Ugly stories about you and me. There's talk of forming a posse to deal with the Apache problem on your father's land." "I know. He confronted my father today." Isabella reached for Aiyana's hands, drawing strength from his touch. "But Aiyana, I have something wonderful to tell you. My father has given us his blessing. He's offered to help us start a new life in California, somewhere we can be together without fear." Aiyana's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with concern. "Isabella, I cannot ask you to abandon everything you've known for an uncertain future with me. The life you would have as my wife would be the life I choose," Isabella interrupted firmly. "Aiyana, don't you understand? You've already given me more happiness and fulfillment than I ever dreamed possible. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together." "You speak of challenges as if they're distant possibilities. Isabella, if we marry, you will be cut off from polite society. You'll face prejudice and hardship. Your children, our children, will be caught between two worlds never fully accepted by either." Isabella pulled his hands to her heart, pressing them against her chest so he could feel the steady beat that belonged entirely to him. "Our children will be raised to understand that love transcends boundaries, that character matters more than convention. They'll be stronger for having parents who chose love over fear." In the moonlight, Isabella could see the war playing out in Aiyana's expression. Love battling with protectiveness, hope struggling against practical concerns. Finally, love won. "You are certain this is what you want?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. No regrets, no looking back? The only regret I would have is if I let you walk away because I was too frightened to fight for what we have. Isabella smiled, thinking of the sheltered girl she had been just weeks ago. You taught me to recognize the difference between what glitters and what has true value, remember? You have true value, Aiyana, we have true value. When he kissed her this time, it was with the passion of a man claiming his future and the tenderness of someone who understood the precious nature of what they were building together. When they finally parted, both were breathless with love and possibility. Then we'll leave for California as soon as arrangements can be made, Aiyana said. I'll speak to your father tomorrow about the details. And Jake Morrison? Aiyana's expression hardened slightly. Morrison is a coward who strikes at what he cannot have. Once we're gone, he'll find other targets for his spite. 6 weeks later, Isabella stood on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, her hand clasped in her husband's as they watched the sun set over the water. They had been married by a progressive minister in San Francisco who believed that love transcended racial boundaries and had settled in a small coastal community where their mixed marriage, while unusual, was not seen as scandalous. The journey had not been without challenges. They had faced suspicious stares, whispered comments, and outright hostility from some quarters, but they had also found acceptance and friendship from unexpected sources. Other couples who had chosen love over convention, families who judged them by their character rather than their heritage. Do you ever regret it? Aiyana asked, his arm encircling her waist as the ocean breeze played with her hair. Isabella leaned into his warmth, thinking of all they had overcome and all that lay ahead. Never, she said with absolute certainty. You taught me the most important lesson of all, that real love isn't about finding someone who fits into your existing world. It's about being brave enough to build a new world together. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Isabella reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had started out believing she needed to learn how to win Jake Morrison's heart, but what she had really learned was how to recognize and claim her own. In choosing Aiyana, she hadn't just found love, she had found herself. And that, Isabella knew, was worth any challenge they might face together.